My name's Jim Serpico, and this... Should I start with my name? Or should I start with this is Bread for the People? Do you like it like this? Welcome to Bread. Or do you like it like this? Welcome. Ready? Welcome to Bread for the People. Mine... Is there a script? All right, I'm here today with Maurizio Leo, the founder of The Perfect Loaf. The Perfect Loaf is a website dedicated to baking naturally leavened sourdough bread at home. The Perfect Loaf has won numerous awards, and Maurizio has been featured on Food and Wine magazine, Bon Appetit, among others. Maurizio, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Jim.
How's your day going today? Have you been working on the blog?
I'm always working on the blog. I think because I'm just baking pretty much every day. So in some way or another, even if I'm just baking a loaf of bread here for my family, it kind of goes into something I'm hoping to turn into, some writing or some video to help someone else bake in the same way.
Right. Are you shooting video almost every day?
I'm not a huge video kind of production person. I've taken photos for a long time, and I think that's something that I have always just kind of gravitated towards.
Sure.
So video is a little bit of a change for me, but I'd say I'm increasing the amount of video that I'm doing. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, you have one of the most helpful blogs for home bakers in the country and probably around the world. Did you set out to do that from the very beginning to help people? Did it have to do with your struggles along the way of trying to figure out how to bake the perfect loaf?
Yeah. I started out just kind of so amazed by the process of natural fermentation and sourdough. I think because I got sucked in, from the beginning, from that very first loaf of bread that I made, I knew that there was some complexities there and, kind of the challenges that I went through when I started the whole process of creating a starter and doing all those things. It was hard in the beginning because back then, this was over a decade ago now, I've been baking. There were some great books for sure, but there wasn't a lot of like online content or videos. There were a few helpful sites, but back then there really wasn't a lot, for home bakers. It was kind of one of those crafts where you had to kind of apprentice with someone before
Right.
you could really understand, what's going on. And so, I started my website actually maybe 6 months or so after I originally started baking. And my whole thing was like, okay, if I'm struggling through this, maybe I can help a few people learn in the way that I'm doing it. That way they can kind of shortcut and not have to spend a month or whatever it took for me to create my starter in the beginning.
Right. Now, did you actually apprentice with someone?
I did not, no. So yeah, I actually went to school for engineering. So I'm a computer software engineer, so I'm at the computer all day, and I just learned baking through books and scouring whatever information I could online. I did take some classes later on, but that was well into at least 5 years or so into me baking.
That's amazing. I pretty much taught myself the same way, a lot of trial and error, and I'm still learning. There's so much to learn. But I know you were inspired by your family. I believe your father owned a restaurant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so my dad, he's Italian. He grew up in Italy. He came over here when he was about 20 to New Mexico. He studied at culinary school in Italy, and he always kind of worked in restaurants. And so when he came here in the U.S., he opened a restaurant here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it's been around for 40 years. So he's been working the restaurant, and I grew up at that restaurant. So every summer when we were off from school, I kind of was too young to really help in the kitchen, but I feel like I absorbed the atmosphere and kind of, watching my dad teach other people how to cook or how to make pizza and that kind of thing. And then I also, I had the very like stereotypical Italian-American household where my nonna would come from Italy and stay for like 3 months, and she was making pasta. She was a professional chef as well, so she was making pasta in our kitchen, and, I totally took that for granted as a kid. I would love to have that now, but I was very much, I think, inspired by food in general with my upbringing and kind of my family.
We sit around sometimes, maybe 3, 4, 5 times a year. We make pasta together as a family. I think it's such a cool activity to do with family and friends.
Absolutely.
Do you do that with your kids?
I do, yeah. I post about it on Instagram occasionally, and it's just fun to like, not only teach them about something that I feel like they should know, like it's a useful skill to have, but it's just kind of fun to let them go wild and have fun with food, right? It doesn't always have to be, I'm very much an engineer, so I'm very, process oriented, which is why I think baking appeals to me so much. But at the same time, I want my kids to have fun with it. It doesn't have to all be, numbers and spreadsheets and stuff. So I love doing that.
Absolutely. I did want to ask you about your engineering background. You touched upon it just now, but do you think there's an overlap and one thing relates to the other? And there's a reason that background attracts you to the science of baking bread?
I think so. I think you can be an amazing baker, and you definitely don't have to be an engineer or a scientist or any of that stuff. I mean, of course, people have been making bread for thousands of years without any of that kind of the knowledge that we have today. But I feel like my personality is it's one that's always focused on like algorithms and process and like iterative development, iterative improvement. The craft side of baking, just kind of the repetitions that you need to become proficient in the craft, like any other craft, very much appealed to me. But also the spreadsheets, the numbers, and like creating formulas and improving things just a little bit each time you bake it. So I think there is an overlap there, at least for me.
I actually love the numbers part of this too. When we started real small and had it to scale, we had to figure out how to create these spreadsheets to scale. We're constantly modifying the recipes.
Yeah.
For some reason, after a year of making focaccia, our dough is constantly dry. And focaccia, in our case at least, has to be significantly hydrated and constantly making changes there.
I'm the type of person that kind of dives in deep on something and goes all in, and that definitely happened to me with bread. But I also can get kind of bored easy, and I think if I work at something really hard, the minute that I feel like, okay, I'm kind of good at this, I might get kind of bored and move on. But what I love so much about bread and sourdough especially is that, like you said, it's always changing. Like every day there's always something to be improved. Even if you think, okay, I love my focaccia, it's great the way it is today. The next day it might be a little bit off, and it just kind of sticks with you, and you're always just kind of working at that improvement.
Absolutely. Do you ever use, I know you specialize in sourdough and naturally leavened. Do you ever use a touch of commercial yeast?
I get asked this one often because I feel like, a lot of bakers use kind of the hybrid approach.
Right now they do. In pizza, it seems.
Yeah, especially in pizza. And, my dad, with his pizzeria here in town, he never once used natural leavening in his dough. It was just solely instant yeast, and he swore by it, the texture, the kind of the clean flavor that you get. And I mean, I love that. I think that's great. I don't think instant yeast or commercial yeast is a bad thing in any way. But for me personally, I have only ever really worked with natural leavening, and so I know it, and so I've just kind of stuck with it.
Right.
That's not to say in the future maybe I won't try it with, especially like enriched breads or things like brioche and those kind of things. But for me, it's always been natural leavening, and that's it.
A good half of what I do that's naturally leavened, and I kind of stick with that, and then I have another half that's commercial yeast, and I kind of keep it separate. But I'm getting better with the natural yeast in terms of controlling it with cold fermentation. At first I had no refrigeration, so I was purely racing against the clock and making sure I had to take it out of bulk in time, make sure it wasn't overproofed. But I figured out how to get some more refrigeration going on. Because in my case, with baking several hundred loaves in a day, you have to be able to control time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we have big problems on our hand, and I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in kind of a fortunate circumstance where I'm baking 6 to 10 loaves is kind of my maximum. But, I am up here at high altitude. We're about a mile up, and also the temps here are, 105 some days. So there's a lot of things that I have to do to kind of rein in that dough as well. And it can, if you're not on it, like, hawk's eye watching everything, you can have a batch that'll overproof on you in no time. So I totally get it.
Have you been baking your whole professional baking career at that altitude?
Yeah, it's all been. I grew up here in Albuquerque, and I've been. I don't want to say trapped, but I'm going to say trapped here. It's a great place to live, but it has its challenges. I can remember my nonna when she would come from Italy and she would try to make focaccia or anything really, and she would always complain. She's like, "This is the dough is too dry here. It doesn't rise. I don't know what's going on." So I wish I could explain to her now, how to adjust for that, but.
Maybe we just came up with an episode of something. We could do, like how they do that house swap or family swap.
Right.
We could switch. You could come here to the humid New York, and I could go to Albuquerque at your altitude and see what happens.
Yeah, I've taught a couple baking classes, and I taught one in New Orleans. And talk about the complete opposite environment than what I've got going on here. So I had to adjust pretty quick. I was only there for 2 days, so it was an adjustment.
I could only imagine. And the pressure's on when you're in front of a class, I would think.
Right, exactly.
So going back to your time as an engineer, you helped develop an app called Terminal 11.
The company is called Terminal 11. The app is called Skyview.
Okay. Could you tell us about that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I went to school for software engineering. I've always been kind of fascinated with technology. And out of school, I went to work at a defense contractor here in Albuquerque. So I worked on drones back in the day before you could go to Walmart and pick one up. These were these huge unmanned vehicles that were flying around. There were several of us that worked there. We got kind of swept up with apps and cell phones and things when they were first coming out. This was over 10 years ago now at this point. And we entered a competition where we developed a space exploration app where you could hold your phone up to the sky and it would show you can easily spot the sun and the moon, but it would also show you where they would be in the sky throughout the day.
We've used that for film sets I work on because it's very important to know, what we're dealing with shadows and certain light. One of
the highest number of emails we got in the beginning, in the first couple of years of developing Skyview, were from directors and
DPs,
everybody out in Hollywood. They were like, "We love your app because we can track, how to position the set and all these things." So, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was a useful tool, man. I could picture our DP doing it out in Los Angeles every day. This is because we would go on scouts, a week in advance of where we're going to be shooting. And
right.
We knew what time of day we'd be there. So a week ahead of time, he'd be holding this thing up in the sky. This is where it's going to be when we're here. And we're like, "Are you crazy? How do you know this?"
It's still amazing when I use our app because I'm like, since doing that first version 10 years ago, the phones and all these mobile devices have become so fluid and incredible. The sensors are so high precision that you move your phone in the sky and we're plotting thousands of satellites, all the planets, constellations, all these things all at once. And there's a lot of math and hardware optimization going on.
My son has there's a lot of planes flying overhead. He'll shoot it up and it'll tell us the flight. It'll show you a picture of the plane. It'll show you when it took off, where it's going, and when it's going to land.
Yeah, that's incredible.
From the research I've done, it seems like you bake with the Rofco oven.
Yeah. So all of the recipes that I post about on my website on The Perfect Loaf they're all baked in my home oven just because I know most people don't have a professional, or semi-professional bread oven in their garage like I do. But I use both. So I use my home oven to verify recipes, and then I use my Rofco for larger bakes.
I know a lot of the farmers market bakers use them. I've never used one. I've thought about it. One of the things that held me back is the volume in there and the amount of loaves you could bake at one time. But what is it about the design of that oven that is so great for bread?
I feel like it's like a car before cars got all these electronics and crazy, computer chips and things inside. It's like a bare bones machine that works and does the one task that it's supposed to do. You know what I mean? There's you could repair it yourself. There's not a lot of components that can go wrong. And I've had things, small things break like a gasket and I've had to adjust each deck to kind of equalize temperature inside, but it's so bare bones and it's so easy to use. I think that's the draw to it. And it's also a kind of the perfect size for, a small to medium sized baker. It's kind of like the size of a small, like mini fridge. Mm-hmm. And you can put it anywhere. You can stack them together, and so you can quickly ramp up your bread production using that. The downside is that it does not have steam injection, at the touch of a button like a larger professional bakery oven might have. But the flip side there is that I kind of feel like anything that has water in it is more prone to break, because it just, water is just hard on everything, especially here we have very, very hard water. And so it kind of destroys everything that it touches. But I think it's those two things. The price isn't too crazy, and it's just a good all around option.
Like, what's the workaround for the steam in that oven?
So for that, I use a pressurized water sprayer, or, like a food grade. It's a larger like pump sprayer that I pump. Uh-huh. It holds pressure. I load my dough, and then I just spray inside and quickly close the door.
Right at the beginning, right? As you're loading, you spray it. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's easy.
What about a pan of water? Would that help?
Yeah, you can order these, I think they call them steam pods, that are options for the oven, and they slide in on the side. It's actually a pretty ingenious design. They're just these thin metal trays that you can pour water into, and they'll continuously generate steam until, obviously all evaporates out. I used those for a while, and I ended up not keeping them because they take up just a little bit too much space on the sides. So it depends on what you're baking. If you're baking a bunch of thin things like, demi baguettes or something like that, then those would probably fit much nicer for you.
Talking about the water being hard there, does the hardness of the water or the mineral content change the outcome of the bread? And this is a question I ask a lot of people, and I get a lot of different answers. So I just want your opinion on that.
I think it's a great question. I've listened to some of your episodes about bagels and, right, the contention there is with water. And I think even in Italy, some cities claim that, the terroir, that for sure, but the water, or, there's local conditions that make bread a certain way. I actually treat the water. I soften the water, not like to a crazy amount. Otherwise, it's so bad that you leave it sitting somewhere, you'll just get, mineralization on the outside of the container within, a couple days. Wow. I've heard other bakers say, and this is kind of hearsay, that harder water is actually better for baking for whatever reason. Like the mineral content or whatever either results in a better tasting bread, or fermentation is stronger. But a lot of, municipal water sources are usually, or can be, softened. And here mine is softened as well. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. I wish I did. I need to do like side-by-side tests. But
it's all good. I just like hearing what people's instinct is, or what they've heard, or what they believe.
Yeah.
Less concerned with the scientific accuracy, I guess. So you have a new book coming out in November?
It's called The Perfect Loaf. Yeah, it comes out November 8th, finally, after 3 long years of writing through the pandemic and testing and photographing, and it's been a labor of love for sure.
What was the process to put the book out and get it published? Because I'm somewhat versed in getting books set up with comedians and actors. I'm curious to hear what the process is for a book like this.
The publisher, or my publisher, Clarkson Potter, they reached out to me 3 years ago or so. And, they were interested in me submitting a proposal to them on, what I might write the book about. And they were familiar with me because my editor who reached out, Jen Sitt, she's been incredible throughout this whole entire process. I think her husband is a pretty avid sourdough baker. And so there was some connection there. And I think maybe he mentioned me to her, and then they reached out. Yeah, it started from there, and I was always interested in writing a book, but I had kind of said no to many opportunities that I had come across because I didn't feel like the vision from the publisher was aligned with what I had wanted to do with the book. But with Clarkson Potter, they're a publisher that it's like every amazing cookbook I have chances are high that they're going to be the publisher for that. So I was, when they reached out, I was all on board.
That's great. So it took you a couple years. Well, the proposal, there's many different steps in book writing, right? There's
Right.
first like the 20-page, essentially the outline of what the book is, and then you go through that and you submit it. Is that the process you went through?
Yeah, the proposal, my feeling is, they didn't say this, but my feeling is that they had kind of already decided that, I might be a good fit for a bread book for their lineup. So, but usually, yes, you write the proposal, they might review it and then get back to you on whether it's something they want to do. And then you can move forward with hashing out a contract. And by then, I had already started, writing and researching the book. So I was already moving forward at that point. And then it's, a long stretch after you sign the contract. It's a long stretch of you writing before you submit the manuscript, which is kind of like the first cut at it.
Right. Was it easy for you to decide which recipes to include?
It was not easy because I think I've been writing recipes for 10 years for my website, and I always have ideas for bread, kind of rolling around, and I quickly get really excited about certain types of bread, and so I just dumped a huge list on them, and I was like, this is what I'm thinking. The book originally had 100 recipes,
right,
which would have been way too long. We already had to cut, almost half the content that I wrote for the book because it was too long. It's hard. It's hard to decide. There were I'd say there's probably about 20 where I was like, okay, these have to be in the book. Like, anybody who's baking sourdough is going to want to bake these. And then the other ones were kind of like seasonal breads. There were some, I wanted to make some quick foods that you could make instead of like a 2 to 3 day fermentation time. So I tried to do a good balance, and my editor, played a huge part there. She helped me kind of keep the audience in mind. And
I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, because that's the one thing I know about it. You have to define who your audience is and who you're writing for. So in this case, in this book, The Perfect Loaf, who would you say the audience is?
So one of the reasons why I liked going with Clarkson Potter is because they kind of agreed with me on the audience for this book. So I think many bread books target the very beginner baker. I think that's probably a good demographic to go for because there's a lot more beginners than there are, advanced or expert bakers in terms of general population. But they were okay with me targeting a more broad spectrum. I'd say it leans towards the beginner, but I definitely have some very advanced recipes like, brioche and a couple other breads that are more complicated. And then I have some in the middle as well. So I really tried to hit everybody along the way. It's kind of like, it really is the book that I wish I had when I first started baking, because it starts you off from nothing and it kind of walks you through your progression as a baker. Like every year you're going to progress and want to tackle something more challenging or different. And that's what I try to do with the book, is it's always giving you something new to kind of work on next.
Right. What makes brioche harder to bake than other breads?
In terms of natural leavening for brioche, which is, very much not typical. It's probably, to some hardcore bakers, they might be like, oh, that's not real brioche because it's not using instant yeast. There's going to be too much, sourness or whatnot in the flavor profile. So that really, to me, is the challenge. It's managing fermentation to get a very mild flavor profile with lots of rise and a very delicate texture in the bread. So doing all those with sourdough is pretty challenging just because of the long fermentation time required.
Got it. In a lot of your recipes, they're same-day bulk rises and same-day bakes with natural leavened bread. I don't do that, but I'm interested in that. I
think it's awesome. I probably do maybe half of my bakes are, retarded or cold proofed. Maybe it might be a little bit more than that because I do enjoy that long fermentation time and the flavor that you get. But for a same day bake, you can develop a very interesting flavor profile in the bread. And I think it's really delicious in a different way. You get different flavors that kind of come through. You don't have as much, you definitely don't have as much sourness. And, I'm talking about the types of breads that I make. You can still make a same day bread that's very sour if you want, but that shorter fermentation time, I feel like it's it's a very clean taste. It's more like, letting the grain flavor kind of come forward at its maximum.
Do you have to use more starter if it's not proofing as long, bulk proofing?
It's a good question. It depends on all the other factors. So usually for me, when I do a same day bread, I do use more pre-ferment. So I'll either build a levain that goes overnight and it's much much larger, or you can, increase the temperature of the dough if you want to, or, you can use more whole grains. So you've got all of those kind of levers that you want to balance out to kind of speed the bread along a little faster.
Okay. And how would you go about making a same day bread more sour?
For that, what you could do is you can use more whole grains. More whole grains will definitely give you a more sour flavor profile. I like to build an overnight levain that is all whole grain, low hydration, 50 to 60% water to flour. Let that ripen overnight, and that gives bacteria a chance to really get active in there. Plus, you're building up a lot of kind of acidity in the pre-ferment itself. Those two things right there alone will get you pretty far. Like you'll get a much more sour bread. And then to do one more, I mean, if you wanted to take it even farther, like in my book, I have a recipe for very sour bread, and you could take that dough after you've shaped it and let it proof in the refrigerator for even longer. But for a same day, more whole grains, an overnight levain. It's kind of a balancing act with how much pre-ferment you put in the dough, because if you put in a high percentage, then that can, there's a lot of factors, but that can result in a less sour bread. It's kind of counterintuitive, because usually you would think, okay, more sour pre-ferment will give you a super sour bread, but that's not always the case. It really depends on the flour, the temperature, and even the hydration can play a role.
It's interesting. My bread's not particularly sour. It has been by accident, because it ended up in the fridge for 3 or 4 days instead of normal 2. And we were very excited when we ate it.
Right.
This is the answer. But there's probably other ways to achieve the same thing in less time. I'm still trying to figure that out,
Yeah. In my book, I call it the extra sour sourdough bread. And what I do there is I do what I just mentioned. So an overnight levain with whole grains. And then I do, which I think is the way you bake most often, is a cold bulk ferment. So I'll put the bulk tub, in the fridge and let it proof overnight.
I actually don't. I do a room temperature bulk ferment, and then
into the fridge before dividing.
I bake 2 ways, and it's all based on schedule. I try to mix my weekend. I do markets on Saturdays and Sundays. I try to do all my mixing on Friday mornings or Thursday night, actually, and let it all rise room temperature, bulk ferment overnight.
Oh, okay.
And then Friday morning, I put 1 batch in the fridge, and then the Saturday stuff I shape right away and I put in the oven.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I've never done that. I've never shaped. Well, I guess I should say I've never taken a dough out of the fridge in bulk, shaped, and then baked.
It's amazing.
Quickly.
It's amazing.
That's pretty cool.
Sometimes I'll let it sit for a half hour, or sometimes if I'm shaping, I could do like 12 boules at one time, and the other dough for the next 12 are sitting out, and they have the benefit of now waiting about a half hour, or whatever that time is, and there's a little bit of a difference. But yeah, a lot of it came down for me convenience, because I started doing it out of my home without much help and could only do what I can do with the tools I had.
Yeah, and I think for every baker who's baking at scale, I think a lot of the bread that they make is solely based on the process that they have to conform to ensure that they can bake the bread at the time they need it. Especially if you have a small oven and you have to stagger things, or whatever constraints you have.
Yeah. When we first started, we were doing it out of the actual regular kitchen oven, and boy,
that's a lot of bread.
It was nuts. It was just nuts. Then we got a steam convection oven, which I do like. It doesn't have stone, but it's got the steam, so that helps.
Yeah, for sure. I've always wished I had one of those. It makes it makes it much easier.
Yeah. So some of the recipes in the book, you talk about Roman style pizza and focaccia. I don't know if it's in the book or somewhere else. You talk about pizza al taglio.
Hmm.
Is that in the book?
Yeah, I have a, it's pizza al taglio, which is just kind of like, cut pizza, or pizza by the piece.
Right. And that's baked in a sheet pan with a steel? Or is the pan the steel?
You can do it either way. It really depends on your pan. I like to have either a baking steel or a baking stone in the oven, and then slide the pan on top if you find that the bottom isn't coloring,
Is that, you mentioned a Lloyd pan, which I had never heard of.
Yeah, you should look at that company. They make pans, I think, up in Oregon, and the way they make their pans, the metal and the coating and everything they have on them, it just always results in like the most perfect crust for focaccia or any kind of pizza you're making. I cherish those pans that I have because they just do such a great job at efficiently conducting heat to the dough that's inside.
Do you oil that pan?
It depends on the recipe. If I'm doing like a focaccia, for sure. With the pizza al taglio, I don't usually oil it. I just kind of shape that out and stretch it out. But you can, if you like with focaccia, it works great.
What do you consider the difference between focaccia and a pizza like al taglio?
It's a great question. It's kind of a heated question, maybe.
A loaded question.
A loaded question. There you go. Yeah. It's kind of like my view on it. So I think there's all these in Italy, there's heated cultural lines that are drawn between the different foods that you can make. Some people consider like focaccia pizza, and so it gets complicated. But for me, focaccia is definitely thicker than pizza al taglio. That one, that kind of pizza is thinner. It's got a little bit more of a crispy crust to it, and you're not going for like a super thick slice like you would like a Sicilian or those kind of pizzas. So it's, to me, those are the two definite distinctions. But also with focaccia, I usually tend to side with more simple toppings, usually just like some herbs and olive oil and salt, whereas al taglio can be whatever you want. I like to do arugula and even like pepperoni on top, or zucchini, or any of those toppings.
I do a focaccia with truffle zest and truffle salt and a little rosemary. Good. It's nice. It's got that. When I bring that to the market, everyone can smell it and they freak out.
Yeah, the truffles are, I feel like, this magical food that they're so good, and I've never had it on focaccia, but I would definitely buy that.
It's pretty great. I remember, and this is one of for us, the inspirations for baking together. We went as a family to Rome, Florence, and Venice. I think it was in Rome. Everything had truffles. Every restaurant you walked in smelled like truffles, and my kids hadn't really smelled it before, and they were freaked. They didn't like it. They did not like it at first.
I think, I don't know that my kids would like it. I feel like it's something when you get older, you kind of start to gravitate more towards.
Yeah, definitely. When you traveled to Italy quite a bit as a kid with your family, right? Yeah,
we went back. Most of my family is there in Italy, so we went back there almost every year. And when I got older, I also went back. My brother lived there for a number of years, and so I'd go visit him, and we'd travel around and that kind of thing. So yeah.
And did some of that rub off on you in terms of adventuring into those restaurants and seeing those types of food? Was it different than what you grew up with back home in the States?
Yeah, it was very different. I think the impact there that had the most effect on me was down in southern Italy, where my dad's family is from. It's very much that community meal where we have a huge family down there, so everybody would come every night like at 8, and we'd eat until 11 kind of thing, and they'd be making food in their wood-fired oven. We'd have gelato with a local place that made it. They'd be making pasta by hand. They take the time to ensure the food is as best as it could be, and it's not expensive food. It's just the time and the care and the effort is put into the meals to make sure that everybody is enjoying it. That's the biggest impact that had on me.
Now, I know you have the Perfect Loaf offers memberships, and you donate a percentage of all the money you raise there to support carbon removal. Is that right?
Yeah, I've changed where I've put those donations to over the years. But yeah, I run a membership where it's kind of like a little community where people have come to join, and we have like a little Discord server that we talk on, which is pretty active. Like, people are posting pictures and asking for help. I don't have any kind of like paid, paywall or anything on my site. It's all, completely free. But I did the membership to kind of form a way for me to continue to work on the site, like just complete dedication. So all of the funds that I collect there, go into the site and allow me to write all the articles and the guides and things. But I also felt like, since we're all kind of creating this community of, like-minded bakers, I feel like some of that should go back in some way. And in the past, I've donated those funds to like Action Against Hunger and some other food-related ones. But I've recently switched to Strike Climate because I love kind of their mission. It's all about, removing carbon from the atmosphere. And I think that's something that's, super critical right now. It may not feel like something as appropriate as food. Like, since this is a food site, shouldn't I be giving to like a food company? But I feel like if we can't grow wheat, we can't make bread. So exactly. That's the connection.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you're doing great things. I really love your work, and I look forward to getting my hands on the book. I urge everyone that listens to this to check it out. And certainly, if you don't know Mauricio's site, The Perfect Loaf, please give it a look. I think you're going to love it. I know a lot of people who listen to this already do know it. And it's been great to get to know you a little bit. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, likewise. This has been fun. I'm always up for talking about bread.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.